Para sa ating Salamat Dok segment today, we have a very serious and pwede rin controversial topic for today's video. I am Doc 𝗀𝗃, ang middle child, naiwan sa party ni Mama, matangkad siguro at hindi favorite ni Mama.
I'm your favorite doctor, a fast guard, God of Hammers, and son of Odin G. Odin. Sorry about that.
And I am Doc Jill, ang magdadala sa inyo sa exciting part.
Kilala sa akin, dati ako yung doktor ng pamilya, pero parang mas kilala niyo ako bilang yung hindi paboritong anak.
We will be talking about euthanasia from taking live humans, a chapter from Peter Singer's Practical Ethics book. Before we delve into deeper topics about euthanasia, let us first establish a good definition of it. Euthanasia is a gentle and easy death according to the dictionary. It has been regarded as physician-assisted dying, death with dignity, and aid in dying. However, calling it death with dignity may raise complications as dignity might have a subjective meaning for all. Aid in dying may also be misleading as aid may come in different forms such as simply giving pain relief or a lethal injection or perhaps other methods that could lead to death. This is why physician-assisted dying is most applicable as it stresses the presence of a physician to assist the patient. This also dismisses any negative connotation that connects euthanasia to suicide. There's a controversy with giving assistance to dying. This is especially seen in the conditions of euthanasia and abortion. One main argument against this would be the oath of Hippocrates, which states to give no deadly medicine to anyone if asked, nor suggest any such counsel. Nevertheless, euthanasia has been legalized in a few countries already, such as the Netherlands, Switzerland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and a few American states. There are three types of euthanasia, namely voluntary euthanasia, involuntary euthanasia, and non-voluntary euthanasia. Voluntary euthanasia is carried out with a voluntary request from the patient, but the patient should be mentally competent and adequately informed. Involuntary euthanasia is done without the consent of the patient, either because they are not asked or they are asked but chose to live. This applies if the patient is killed with the intention of preventing unbearable suffering. Non-voluntary euthanasia is done when the person is not capable of making a choice between life and death. This applies to infants intellectually disabled since birth, severely disabled or ill infants, and elderly who have lost their capacities to understand and make a choice. In this case, patients will be killed for their sake or for the sake of their family. Voluntary euthanasia already has the consent of the patient for death, which makes it relatively less controversial than the two. Let's talk about non-voluntary euthanasia. Non-voluntary euthanasia is justifiable for subjects who never had the capacity to choose to live or die, and subjects who once had the capacity to choose but were unable to because of their condition. This applies to infanticide as well. You may ask, how is infanticide justifiable? The characteristics of a human being, according to Peter Singer, are rationality, autonomy, and self-awareness, which are all lacking for an infant. This doesn't place infants in the same place as normal humans who are rational, autonomous, and self-aware. What about their future, their potential to be a rational, autonomous, and self-aware human being? The possibilities or potential of an infant are not considered, and the characteristics during the time of termination are only significant. In this consideration, infants do not have the capacity to see themselves as entities that have the potential to exist for a long time. We consider the concepts of prior existence utilitarianism and total utilitarianism for infanticide. We will give three situations wherein these two concepts are considered. For the first situation, we think about a life for an infant that is reasonably judged not to be worth living. The concepts of prior existence utilitarianism and total utilitarianism apply as there are no extrinsic reasons to keep the child alive. For the second situation, we think about a life for an infant that is less promising of a normal child but is still worth living. The concept of prior existence utilitarianism applies in this as the infant can be kept alive and supported through consistent medical care. For the last situation, we consider the replaceability argument, which states that infants are replaceable. This considers the prospect of a better life if the first disabled or ill infant is killed and a second normal one is born. A happy life would be provided for the normal child. The timing for discovering the problem for the infant is important when considering infanticide. To help identify, prenatal diagnoses are available. Considering this does not imply a lack of regard for disabled people who have survived, but is only an available choice for parents. Adoption is also an option for parents to relieve themselves of the burden, but it is still important to consider the situation of the infant. Other situations that may call for non-voluntary euthanasia would be for patients in a persistent vegetative state. A life like this has no intrinsic value already. This would also only end up in two situations: instant death or instant coma followed by death. Basically, it both ends in death.
Your daughter is sleeping with my husband.
Jill.
Sarah, no.
Punta pa lang tayo sa exciting part.
Justified voluntary euthanasia on 4 distinct grounds. O, diba? Sabi ko sa inyo. Papunta pa lang tayo sa exciting part. First, the classical utilitarian objection. Sabi nga sa previous discussions natin sa class, sa utilitarianism, happiness ang goal. Kaya naman, classical or hedonistic utilitarianism judges actions by their tendency to maximize pleasure or happiness and minimize pain or unhappiness. Kaya indirectly, being a person is important, especially for a hedonistic utilitarian. Dito papasok ang fear argument. As self-aware beings, alam natin na may future tayo. At the same time, we also think of a possible short future, kaya may takot tayo sa ating death. Mula sa takot na to, pwedeng naisip natin ang possible worst effects sa iba if ginawang legal ang voluntary euthanasia. Pero, kung ito ay i-analyze natin, ang fear argument ay actually in favor sa voluntary euthanasia. Dahil kapag ito ay hindi permitted, we may have a reason to fear that our deaths may be prolonged and agonizing. Second, the preference utilitarianism calculation. Preference utilitarianism is also in favor of voluntary euthanasia. This accounts for a desire to live as a reason for not killing, just as it must account for a desire to die as a reason for killing. So if prefer ng affected person ang euthanasia, that is enough reason para ibigay yun sa kanya. Third, we have the theory of rights, which says to have a right to life, one must be able to desire their continued existence. So if they want to waive such right sa pamamagitan ng euthanasia, they can, as long as they choose to do so. Fourth and last is the principle of respect for autonomy, which tells us to allow rational beings to live their lives according to their own will at hindi napipilitan. Tulad sa theory of rights, if the person chooses to die, this principle will lead us to assist them to do as they choose. Did you know that in some countries, euthanasia is acceptable, but only if it is pasok sa criteria na naka-rise sa law ng bansa? The following are the criteria for euthanasia according to the Dutch law. Okay, going back, syempre, mayroon pa ring tutol sa euthanasia because doctors may be mistaken. Although cases are rare, patients may survive an incurable condition and enjoy their remaining years in good health. Pero, sabi ni Singer, as a utilitarian, the possibility of recovery from the illness should not be overshadowed by the large amount of pain and distress na nararamdaman ng patient. Aanhin pa ang mahabang buhay kung puro sakit lang din ang nararanasan. Parang pinaprolong lang din ang agony kung ganon. Ang makakaginhawa pa rin sa patient ang priority. Pero minsan, kahit decision na talaga ng patient to opt for euthanasia to end their suffering, doctors deny to help them because although suicide is legal, assisted suicide is illegal in most jurisdictions. Let me introduce to you Dr. Jack Kevorkian. Dr. Jack helped people, especially the terminally ill, to die with a suicide machine. Ayan siya. Here are two cases involving Dr. Kevorkian. First, we have the Janet Adkins case. Janet was suffering from Alzheimer's but was competent enough to make a decision to end her life. So, Dr. Kevorkian was charged with murder after letting her use the machine, but were dropped since Janet caused her own death. This case presents a form of assisted suicide kasi technically, Janet was the one who flipped the switch and not Dr. Kevorkian. In our second case involving Thomas Yuke, who was suffering from ALS, which didn't allow him to control his muscles well, with Thomas' case, Dr. Kevorkian crossed from assisted suicide to voluntary euthanasia as he gave Thomas the drug considering Thomas' condition. Knowing the difficulty that comes with voluntary euthanasia for some patients, Philip Nishke found the Exit International, an organization that runs workshops that advise people how to end their lives reliably and safely. However, publicizing such information is an ethical question, since there is a possibility of misuse by those who are not terminally ill. But, considering the number of countries where both voluntary euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide is legal, the importance of helping those who have a good reason to end their lives outweighs that small risk of misuse. Let's proceed to the justification of voluntary euthanasia on paternalistic grounds. Paternalism cannot justify the prohibition of voluntary euthanasia, since it is an act for which good reasons exist. Diba, voluntary euthanasia only happens sa condition na a person is suffering from an incurable, distressing condition. Sabi nga ni John Stuart Mill, the state should never interfere with the individual except to prevent harm from others. With that, the individual's own good is not a proper reason for state intervention. O, diba? Ako ulit. Nasa exciting part pa rin kasi tayo. Since tapos na tayo sa voluntary, let's proceed with not justifying involuntary euthanasia. Don't worry, maikli lang to. Maikli lang to part na to, promise. Just a quick recap on its definition. Involuntary euthanasia is subjecting the patient to euthanasia without consent. Non-consensual siya, unlike sa voluntary euthanasia na consensual. So the question is it possible to justify involuntary euthanasia on paternalistic grounds to save someone from extreme agony? Well, to make a decision based on these grounds, the person making the decision should be in a better position to make the judgment for another person. Basically, the paternalistic argument only applies when the person to be killed does not realize the future agony they will be subjected to. But these cases are rare, as they are more common in fiction than reality. So, euthanasia is only justifiable if those killed either lack the ability to consent to death because they lack the capacity to understand the situation, or they have made an informed, voluntary, and settled decision to die.
Hi, so it's Loki's wife. I mean, favorite brother, Doctor. So, ayan. So far, the conclusions we have had all lead to the violation of one of the most fundamental tenets of Western ethics, which is killing an innocent human being is always wrong. However, Singer presented another area of accepted medical practice that, according to him, is not intrinsically different from the practice he advocates. He presented Baby Doe. So in 1982, Baby Doe was born with Down syndrome and an improperly formed esophagus. So in simple terms, it's impossible for the baby to receive nourishment through the mouth. Although the parents were offered surgery to fix the problem, they refused since para sa kanila or like sa kanila na mismo nanggaling, it was in the best interests of Baby Doe and the rest of the family to refuse. Take note na without the surgery, Baby Doe would soon die. Baby Doe's case was taken to the court by the hospital authorities, pero long story short, the baby died before any further legal action took place. Isa sa mga naging result ng case ni Baby Doe ay yung pag-issue ng US government ng mga regulation na All infants are to be given necessary life-saving treatments regardless kung anong disability yung meron sila. Kaso, tinutulan ito ng American Medical Associations and the American Academy of Pediatrics. So, si Dr. Everett, the person behind this attempted regulation, indicated 3 conditions wherein life-saving treatment would not be appropriate. First condition ay yung mga anencephalic infants or yung mga pinanganak without a brain. Pangalawa ay yung mga infants with extreme prematurity. For example, yung mga may severe bleeding sa kanilang brain. And lastly, infants lacking a major part of their digestive tract. Example nito ay yung mga nakadepende na lang sa isang drip na nagpo-provide ng nourishment. So kahit na tinanggap din nila eventually yung mga regulations na pinropose, which allow the doctors to have some flexibility, surveys conducted still showed na merong mga, like yung iba naniniwala na yung mga regulations, they weren't really necessary. Tapos other regarded the regulations as interference with the rights of the parents, while others thought that the regulations did not allow consideration of the infant's suffering. In most severe conditions, allowing an infant to die is the only humane and ethically acceptable course to take. But why is it wrong to kill infants? We have the acts and omissions doctrine. There is an important moral distinction between performing an act that has certain consequences and omitting to do something that has the same consequences. So what does this mean? It simply means na killing is different from letting someone die. Dito na papasok yung active and passive euthanasia. So active euthanasia refers to the act of killing, or for example, if the doctor gives the child a lethal injection. On the other hand, passive euthanasia is allowing someone to die. So sa example natin, instead of giving the child lethal injection, the doctor would simply stop administering medicine to the child. So based on that, there's no intrinsic difference between killing and allowing to die. Passive euthanasia is accepted as humane and proper in certain cases. So if that's the case, then active euthanasia should also be considered humane and proper. However, an argument arises that the difference between acts and omissions is the intention of the action. We have the doctrine of double effect. One action may have 2 effects. The action is made permissible as long as the directly intended effect does not violate absolute moral rule, which is yung killing. The patient dying is considered as an unwanted side effect. So basically, passive ways of ending life result in a drawn-out death. Since dito na papasok yung mga irrelevant factors because, quote-unquote, you're allowing nature to take its course. However, having chosen death, we should ensure that it comes the best way possible, which in most cases should be gentle and painless. So for the last part of this chapter, we're going to talk about the slippery slope from euthanasia to genocide. A life of physical suffering with no forms of pleasure and minimal levels of self-awareness is not worth living at all. Recognizing that some lives are not worth living is not analogous and does not correlate to the Nazis committing mass murder. The Nazis' euthanasia program is not aligned with what euthanasia is, which is showing concern for the suffering of those killed. Legalizing euthanasia may be a dangerous weapon for our country. So we should keep the government democratic, open, and in the hands of people who would not wish to kill their opponents. As long as acts of euthanasia are carried out by a member of medical profession, it will most likely not be used to kill.